It was almost 9:30 p.m. when I pulled into her driveway. The porch light was on, casting a soft golden glow over the damp pavement. I hadn't meant to come this late. I hadn't even planned on coming at all. But something about her message earlier that day had stuck with me. Just 5 words. "If you're free tonight, come." I stared at it for hours. I typed out a reply 3 times, deleted it each time. Then finally, without answering, I got in the car and drove. I'd known Evelyn for years. She was my former high school English teacher. When I graduated and left for college, we didn't talk for a while. Just the occasional polite holiday greeting on Facebook. But then, about a year ago, we ran into each other at a local bookstore. She was standing in the fiction section, reading the back of a novel I'd just finished the week before. That first conversation lasted nearly an hour. Since then, we'd had coffee a few times, ran into each other around town. Sometimes she'd text me when she found a book she thought I'd like. Other times, I'd send her something I'd written, a short story, a poem. She'd always respond with thoughtful feedback, and I started to look forward to her notes more than I should have. But tonight felt different. Her message had no smiley face, no polite buffer, just a quiet invitation that held something unsaid, something heavier. I stepped up to the door, heart pounding, fist raised to knock, but before I could touch the wood, it opened. She stood there, barefoot, in a light gray robe tied at the waist. Her dark hair was pinned up loosely, a few strands falling to her collarbone. The house behind her was warm and dimly lit. I caught the scent of something soft, vanilla or jasmine, drifting out from inside. And then she said it. "You're late." Her voice was low, almost amused, but her eyes were different. Steady, unreadable, like she already knew why I was there, like she'd been waiting, not just tonight, but longer than either of us wanted to admit. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. "Come in," she said and stepped aside. I hesitated for just a second. Then I crossed the threshold. The door closed behind me with a click. The living room was quiet, cozy. A single lamp glowed beside the couch. A record was playing softly in the background. Something old, jazzy. There was a bottle of wine on the coffee table, only 1 glass poured. "Still like Merlot?" she asked, walking past me toward the couch. "I do," I said, voice a bit hoarse. She sat down, one leg curled beneath her, robe parting slightly to reveal just a hint of her thigh. She didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did, and it didn't matter. "Long day?" she asked. I nodded. "You?" She looked at me for a moment. Then, with the slightest smile, she said, "Not really. Just waited." I sat on the edge of the armchair across from her, suddenly unsure of what this was. Was I reading too much into it? Or not enough? The room felt thick with things unspoken. "What made you text me tonight?" I finally asked. She leaned back, took a sip of her wine, then set the glass down. "I was thinking about a story you once sent me," she said. "The one with the man who shows up too late." I remembered it. A short fiction piece I'd written almost 2 years ago, about a man who hesitates to confess his feelings until the woman he loves is already gone. "You said you wrote it because you didn't want to be that guy," she added softly. I swallowed. "Yeah, I did." She tilted her head. "Then why did you wait so long to knock?" I had no answer. She reached over, poured the second glass of wine, and held it out to me. As I took it, her fingers brushed mine. And just like that, the silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full. The wine was good, smooth, deep, a little dry, but I could hardly taste it. I was too focused on the way Evelyn sat across from me. She wasn't putting on a show. She wasn't flirting in the usual sense. And yet, everything about her felt charged. Like every move she made was a deliberate choice in a conversation we weren't speaking out loud. She asked about my writing. I told her I hadn't done much lately, that life had been busy. Busy doing what? She asked. I shrugged. Work mostly, trying to figure out what I want. And? She asked, eyes not leaving mine. I hesitated, still figuring. She smiled faintly. You always had the habit of hiding your real thoughts in metaphors. Occupational hazard, I said with a half laugh. She didn't laugh back. Instead, she stood up slowly and walked toward the fireplace. Her robe shifted as she moved, falling just off one shoulder. It wasn't intentional, it just happened, naturally. She adjusted it without looking at me and picked up a lighter from the mantel. You ever feel like people make assumptions about you because of timing? She asked. Like if they'd met you 5 years earlier or later, you'd be a completely different person in their eyes? I looked at her carefully. I think about that more than I should. She lit a candle on the mantel, the flame flickering between us. The shadows played softly across her face. I almost didn't become a teacher, you know, she said. That caught me off guard. I was going to move to New York and edit books. But then my mom got sick and I stayed. And I taught. And I got used to staying. You're a great teacher, I said. She turned slightly toward me. That's kind of you. But I didn't say I loved it. Just that I got used to it. The way she said that, it landed hard. I realized in that moment how much of her life had probably been shaped by other people's needs. She blew out the match and turned back toward me, leaning against the mantel. You remind me of the person I thought I might have been if I'd gone. That a good thing? I asked, a little unsure. I don't know yet, she said, eyes still locked on mine. But I think you came back into my life for a reason. And I think tonight matters. The air between us shifted. I set my glass down, stood up slowly. We were only a few feet apart now. Evelyn, I began. I don't want to misunderstand anything here. I respect you. Always have. But I don't want to cross a line if. She held up her hand gently. I wouldn't have asked you to come if I didn't want you here, she said. But I didn't ask you to come to seduce you. I asked you to come because I trust you. And because I don't want to sit here alone pretending I don't feel what I feel. There it was. No riddles. No poetry. Just truth. I'm not asking you to do anything, she added. Just stay. Talk. Let this moment be whatever it is. No promises. No expectations. I nodded, and I stayed. We sat on the couch together. Closer this time. Her leg brushed mine and neither of us moved away. The candlelight flickered softly in the room. The music had stopped, but we didn't restart it. Instead, she talked, and I listened. Then I talked, and she listened. About life, about regrets, about the strange timing of it all. Eventually, she rested her head on my shoulder. And we sat like that for what felt like forever, but also not long enough. I didn't realize I'd fallen asleep until I felt the early morning sun warming my face. Evelyn's head was still on my shoulder, her breathing soft and steady. A blanket had been draped over us sometime during the night. The candle on the mantel had long since burned out, leaving only a small trail of wax on the wood. For a moment, I didn't move. I didn't want to disturb the silence, the stillness that wrapped around us like something sacred. It wasn't until Evelyn stirred and slowly sat up that I did too. She blinked, adjusting to the light, and gave me a sleepy smile. It wasn't seductive or mysterious. It was real, warm, human. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "Yeah. You?" "A little. I kept waiting for the sun." She stood up, stretching slightly, and tightened the robe around her waist. Her hair had loosened from its bun during the night, now resting over her shoulders in soft waves. She looked peaceful, but I could tell something else was brewing beneath the surface. I followed her into the kitchen, where she filled a kettle and placed it on the stove. The place was cozy, lined with cookbooks and ceramic mugs, the kind of space that looked lived in and cared for. I stood in the doorway, unsure if we were still in last night's world or a new one altogether. She glanced over at me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I just don't know what happens now." The kettle hadn't started to whistle yet, but the tension between us was rising again, subtle and slow. "You don't have to know," she replied, reaching into the cupboard. "Not everything needs a name right away. I guess I'm just trying to be respectful. I don't want to mess this up, or cross lines we can't uncross." Evelyn turned to face me, holding 2 mugs in her hands. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said gently, "and last night wasn't a mistake." I exhaled, a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "But," she added, placing the mugs on the counter, "this is complicated. I know that. There's an age gap, history, people might talk, and I need to be sure we're not confusing comfort with something deeper." "You think we were just comforting each other?" She leaned back against the counter. "I don't know yet. Maybe that's part of it. But I meant what I said last night. I wanted you here. I wanted you close." I stepped into the kitchen slowly. "Then what are you afraid of?" Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and for the first time since I arrived, I saw something vulnerable behind her calm. "I'm afraid I'll let myself hope for something I can't have." My heart dropped a little. "I'm not going anywhere," I said quietly. "I came because I wanted to be here, not out of confusion, not because I was lonely, but because I care, really care. And I think maybe we both need to stop hiding behind what-ifs." The kettle whistled sharply, but neither of us moved. Evelyn stepped forward. Just one step, and I met her there. Our faces were close, not quite touching. "Not yet." "Then let's just see what this is," she whispered. "No labels, no rushing." And this time, when she leaned in, it wasn't a question. It was the beginning of an answer. The days that followed didn't feel like real life, at least not the kind of life I'd grown used to. There was a rhythm between Evelyn and me that didn't need explanation. We didn't rush into anything, but we didn't avoid anything either. We just let it happen. Sometimes we'd talk for hours. Other times we'd sit in silence. She'd make coffee. I'd bring pastries from the little place near my building. She'd grade papers at the kitchen table while I typed quietly on my laptop, the two of us moving in parallel, comfortably. But the outside world was always there, waiting. It came creeping back one afternoon as we sat on her back porch. The sky was gray, and the wind carried that faint scent of rain. Evelyn was reading, legs tucked up underneath her, while I watched the storm roll in. "I have to go back to work tomorrow," she said, her voice low. I nodded. "I figured. You don't have to stop coming by," she added, but the way she said it carried a caution I couldn't ignore. I looked at her carefully. "But But we both know this isn't something that would make sense to anyone else. I didn't answer right away. She continued, people talk. They assume. I've worked my entire career building a reputation. I'm not ashamed of you, not even a little, but I also know what people would say. About the age difference. The circumstances. You think I care about that? I said. Let them talk. Her gaze softened. I know you don't. That's one of the reasons I trust you. But I've lived long enough to know that trust doesn't stop rumors. Or consequences. So what, Evelyn? We just pretend nothing happened. No, she said quickly. No. I couldn't pretend if I tried. But maybe we don't have to decide anything right now. Maybe we let this breathe. Let it exist in its own time. If it's real, it'll last. I sat back, watching her closely. I don't want you to feel like you're just a moment for me, she said. Because you're not. I reached across the small table and took her hand. And you're not just a lesson I learned and moved on from. We sat like that, letting the storm move closer, the wind brushing our skin. Weeks passed. She returned to her regular schedule. I dove into my writing like I hadn't in years. We saw each other when we could, quiet dinners, walks around the neighborhood, nights where I stayed too late and left too early. We weren't hiding, but we weren't announcing ourselves either. One night I arrived unannounced, just like that first evening. This time she wasn't in a robe. She wore jeans and a faded black sweater, her hair tied back in that familiar bun. She looked breathtakingly normal, and I loved that. She opened the door, smiled softly. You're late again, she said, echoing that first moment. I smiled back. Some things are worth being late for. This time she didn't step aside. She stepped toward me, wrapped her arms around me, held me like she meant it. They say the most meaningful moments in life rarely come with clarity. They come with a choice, a risk, a deep breath. Evelyn wasn't a fantasy. She wasn't some dream of a perfect woman. She was real, flawed, honest, and for some reason, she had opened her door to me. Not just that night, but again and again since. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. When she said, "You're late," what she really meant was, "You still came," and that made all the difference.